welcome to the Core Concepts Lecture Series. My name is James Renford Powell, and I'm your host, as usual, for this show. Our guest is Dr. Jaysen Rand, and Dr. Rand has had a tremendous career in music and is going to tell us about some things going back to his childhood. He is the author of The Return of Planet X. And this is a name that was given by NASA, and they dropped it real quick, and then they came back and they called it the brown dwarf. And Jaysen has connected this, Dr. Rand has connected this to wormwood and other things from biblical origin. And so he's going to talk to us now, and we want to welcome you to the Core Concepts.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you. And we have a lovely audience tonight.
Thank you.
Where does one begin when trying to talk about the truth? And when the truth has many layers, in fact, life is much like an onion. It's full of layers, and it's full of sub-meanings and sub-rosa kind of intrigues. So, my adventure began for me at a very early age of about 3.5 to 4. I started having regular 3-4 times a week OBEs, out-of-body experiences, wherein I was transmuted from my cute little bed as a child outward and then into space, into a ship, what I would call it. They call them the ships of light. These were large extraterrestrial vessels that had a variety of schooling purposes. One of them was to commingle an ET child about of the same age equivalent, body mass, etc., hooked up with an Earthian child, which in this case would have been myself. And what we did were we were put together in a classroom setting. My friend Elon was always to my right. I was here. I was his sponsor, theoretically, as he was my sponsor. So the two of us began to intertwine our intellects and our experiences. That went on until about age 8. Suddenly, all communication ended. I was devastated. I had no idea what happened. I was even getting involved in learning how to do mental telepathy. It was a shattering experience because it just ended. I found out later why. So between 8 and the age of 11, I kind of foundered because I wasn't sure whether any of what I had thought I had experienced as a very, very small child, from let's say 3.5 to age 8, and suddenly it all ended. So was it real? Was it imagined? Was it a fantasy? Was it some kind of dangerous thing? Well, all of that suddenly ended when I discovered all this business about Roswell in 1947, and all these strange stories. Mind you, I'm very young, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. I'm absorbing everything like a sponge. Just, and it was always involved with UFOs and ETs. So by the time I was 9 or 10, I was digging into encyclopedias and books, and my UFO library started to grow. I still have the original books. When I was a little bitty kid, I still have those same books. Got a personal library of about 40-some books. So, at age 11, my life changed again because while on a fishing trip with my father and my brother, a flying fishing trip up, way up north, 245 miles northeast of Winnipeg, Lake Winnipeg, Canada, up to a huge Canadian province to a lake called Lake Saskatchewan. The Indians where my experience took place was around Gettle Island. It was an island in the middle of this huge lake system. I mean, you could fly for 10 minutes in that direction. There was nothing but lakes and islands. This one island was a flying fishing lodge, and we got there on a Sunday night, and it was raining. It rained all the way from Sunday till Thursday. couldn't go fishing. We'd fish out from the end of the pier. It was freezing cold. Thursday morning, I woke up, birds were singing, sunlight was coming through the windows. It was warm and the steam was coming off the lake, so I jumped up, got in my clothes. My brother and dad did not want to go fishing. They were still sleeping. I took the boat out, bad boy. I rode it out so you wouldn't hear me, started up the motor, and I'm just trolling up and down the shore, catching all kinds of big fish. Northerns, walleyes, good eating. And all of a sudden, the wind comes up from behind me, and within seconds it seemed, started to blow my boat away from the shore. Big waves. What happened was, it was just the eye of the storm that had been passing over the island where I was for an hour or so. And of course the backstorm completely blew me out across the lake. The boat was sinking. I'd given up. I'd lost all my equipment. Everything was gone. Boats didn't have old rowboat, wooden ones, you know, no air pockets. And it filled up, down it went. Somehow I wedged myself down between the two seats with a couple of boat cushions on my neck just to keep me from being thrown out of the boat. I had to go under the bottom of the boat, my legs up and my arms under. Otherwise I'd be thrown out of the boat. I passed out. Either I was for hypothermia. I just passed out. It was gone. When I woke up, I was in the boat just where just as I had passed out. I was on the keel of the boat. I was perfectly dry. All the equipment was back in the boat. I was alive. I thought I had died. Okay, sorry about that.
That took you all the way back. You felt everything again.
Yeah, of course.
That was a long time ago.
I was age 11. So anyway, I'm got my wits back about me, and I realized if I'm dead, then why am I in a boat that seems to be moving inside of a big, it looked like a big plastic, sliced open plastic Easter egg that was glowing. And this object was taking me in the boat across the lake to the shore on the far side. When I got there, I passed out a couple times back and forth. When I woke up the next time, the cocoon thing was gone. The boat was just gently rocking on the surface of the lake. The storm had blown past. It was about 4:30 in the afternoon. And all I knew was that apparently I was alive, but where I was completely strange. Because up in Canada, there are no beach lines and there are no lily pads. It's too far north, it's too cold. They don't grow, you see. And here there are all these things that were familiar to me have been planted by a group of ETs who had prepared the site. I'm moving fast here. Stay with me. They had pre-prepared the site, literally transformed it to accept their ship coming down, and they created a football-sized field of what looked to me like wheat. It's because it's what I wanted it to be as they understood my ability to conceive my thoughts. I felt safe with wheat or grass. And so the boat was in this little bay. Took a oar and I just pushed and pushed and pushed through the lily pads and cottontails, and then up on the beach, pulled the thing up and went up this sand thing. This strange thing was that every time I looked up to the top of the sand dune, it just never got closer. I ran, I climbed, I scratched, and the moment I stopped trying, I seemed to move. It was totally weird. And when I looked to the right, it just bent way out, concave, and it just disappeared. And I looked to the left, the shoreline and the beach line, and then it just suddenly ended at the forest. It looked like there were giant zippers. Hope this is making sense, everybody. It looked like giant zippers. Something within that space was newly created, and it was this scenario for the ship to land. I go through the field, and the grass is still wet, so it had to be done either just after or before it stopped raining, because everything was wet. And I said to myself, if if you are dead, you don't feel wet. I wasn't convinced. I was still really not, bongo.
Not cognizant of where you actually were.
Well, I knew I was physically alive, and I knew I was still on the lake. I recognized things, but the scenario I was in was extremely strange. So, made my way up through the grass, and just as I'm getting through the end of the grass, I'm looking straight ahead, as if it's that wall. I go, look at that wall behind. See that wall over there? Take a look at it with me. Now imagine that goes up 90 feet, and out of it are hanging roots and little rocks and vines and things, as if a big claw had simply taken it and just pulled it all back, just like that, and left it. And at the very bottom of it, right in the middle, was this little carved out little cave. And I looked at it, and I looked at it, because I had about 30 yards of gravel and stuff that I had to traverse before I got to the wall. So I said, okay, that looks good to me. It was actually illuminated, and it was getting dark. I got over there and I looked at it, and it looked really, really weird. It was all smooth, and the bottom was kind of clean and smooth, and I had the 2 boat cushions with me. So I threw the boat cushions in, and I climbed in. The moment I got inside that little thing, it was just enough for me to get in as an 11-year-old kid. Probably 2 feet in, probably a foot and a half, 2 feet high. Like a little thing. The moment I got in, I went to sleep. I was warm, I felt safe, I was scared, I went to sleep. When I woke up, I was hearing this voice in my head again, the same way I had heard it out on the boat, and it was Elon. I still hadn't made the reconnection, you see. It was the same kid on the ship, but I didn't make the connection yet that it was him involved in saving me. So I wake up, and it's him, and he's talking to me very, very clearly, and he's saying, I told you it wasn't going to be so bad. He says, how come you took the boat out? Kind of got the hang of talking back, and I said, you're not supposed to know about things like that. He said, I know everything that's been going on. He said, you almost got yourself killed. And, I kind of cleaned my clock, okay? I got invited on the ship. I spent about 3.5 to 4 hours toward the ship. It's like nothing, it's just like everything you see in Star Trek and more. By the way, if I can diverse a second, I was very fortunate to have a friendship with Gene Roddenberry for about a dozen years before he died. Gene was also one of the people that I mentioned earlier on in the conversation about I keep meeting these people all through my life that are all interconnected. He seems to be one now too. We just talked about that before you ladies came. Where's all this going? Well, they were re-energizing my program, which had been terminated at age 8, which should not have been reignited the way it had been, because they were going to contact me anyway. Me being on the boat was at my own doing, It wasn't supposed to be that way. They were just going to come to the cottage like we always did when I was a kid. I'd be asleep in my bunk with my brother and my dad, and out we go. That was the game plan, which I had done as a child. Instead, I screwed it up. So, saw the ship, met his parents. His parents are what you would call like ambassadors to intelligent civilizations. That's the only way. They're like goodwill ambassadors of that caliber. By the way, they're called Arturians. They're about 375,000 years in advance of our civilization, our culture, and our understandings of life. They are very advanced culture. I was shown their lifestyle. I was shown basically all about this thing we call Planet X. That's one of the reasons I wrote the book, was that was part of my schooling. I saw the whole thing on how this whole thing would transpire. Even the fact that they called it wormwood, and I didn't even know at that time that wormwood was associated with the book of Revelation, chapter 8, verse 11, and the name of the star is wormwood. By the time I was done on the ship, it was about almost 11 o'clock, and it was time to go. I was also at that time, I had agreed I have a small crystal implant. That's all I'll say about it at the moment. It's very personal. I'm in fairly regular contact. When there's a big problem, I know how to do it. I have certain crystals at my house. I have the crystal, personal communicating crystal, which I've showed Jim. Remember? In the little case? Alright. Mine is a continuing experience, and its value is enhanced by the fact that I can prove almost everything I've been saying, and I have evidence of different things, including they led me to where there are a lot of big meteorites. I have 5 of them that I've showed Jim at my home, beautiful meteorites that you just don't go out and find. It's like a little gift to me, to test me. I said, if you're so doggone good, I lived out in the desert. Oh, can I jump? Yeah. Oh, my gosh, it's almost no, it isn't. It's only a half hour.
It's only half hour.
Oh, hey, wake up. Yeah.
Carry on.
Carry on, okay. Well, there's so many pieces to this puzzle that every time I fracture this way, well, what about that? And then I have to go this way. So now I need to talk about the high desert. And a guy named George Van Tassel. I'm not sure if either of you ladies know who that is. He's very famous in UFO folklore. He pioneered early UFO conferences and get-togethers out in the desert about 169 miles northwest of Los Angeles is a community called Landers, California. And in Landers, there's a site where there's a machine built, and I've got the story in here, by the way. Here it is. Here it is. Well, I had it. It tells all about the integratron, and what the integratron is. It was a machine built entirely out of wood. There's not a piece of metal in the machine. It was all glued and fitted and blocked and all this other stuff. And it's a huge machine. And it's built over a cross area where 2 ley lines. Let me explain about ley lines. The Earth is electromagnetic, and as such, there are a number of physical electromagnetic lines of force that somehow or another form themselves into established patterns and lines, and they're associated with the mechanics of the planet. And when these ley lines intersect over each other, and they do many times all around the world, they would have to. If they completely circle, they're going to do this. When you get to the center of one where 2 of them lie, it becomes almost a completely self-tuned, self-generated energy machine, because the 2 grids, one's positive and one's negative, and when they overlay, boom! That's basically how UFOs work, because they just tap into the same grid pattern that's all around the universe and all around space. Sorry to digress again.
And they know where it is.
And they know how to get it, and they know, sure, they don't travel with fuel. Their fuel is ever abundant. Most of the more sophisticated devices. All right, so he built this machine, and it was 3 things. It was a time machine. It was a physical regeneration machine, and it had to do with being a signal. It could send out a signal, which is incredible energy to get attention. And so he built this machine, and from almost the moment he started building it, by the way, he's a very interesting guy. He was one of the people that helped Howard Hughes develop the Spruce Goose. Do you remember that large ship? He was one of the design engineers. His field was electromotive engineering, was his expertise and skills. And then he worked for Hughes, and then he worked for several airline companies. And when Hughes lost his contract with the government to build the Spruce Goose because the war was grinding to an end anyway, he left the company and went off on his own, and then he discovered this place called Giant Rock. And he heard about it from some Indian friends that he had made through his experiences in the airline industry. And they told him about this magical place called Giant Rock. And the Indians say to him, and that's where a lot of the UFOs and the ETs land. They said this to
They
him.
know it.
They said this to him, and he was like, yeah, okay, because he was interested in it anyway. So what does he do? He packs up and he goes, he and his wife, his first wife. And they were there maybe 2 weeks, and by golly gee, my ship lands right out there on the desert. He doesn't even know it because he stops on sleep. When he wakes up, there are these 3 ETs standing at his foot looking down at him, communicating with him telepathically. He hasn't said a word. Anyway, he suddenly realized that it's all true. And then they set him on the course that set him to build the Integratron. Why did he build it? Because it needed to be done. And the place where he built the Integratron was very near a holy site called Giant Rock, and that's in the book too. This Giant Rock is expected or suspected of being the largest freestanding rock in the northern hemisphere. Understand, in all of the northern hemisphere, this rock is the biggest. The problem is, where did a rock that big come from? There's nothing around it for miles that would support the structure of having a rock that big. So the Indians thought that it had been a gift from the gods, because right behind this big rock, up in a little hilly thing, was this beautiful set of freshwater pools that were just there, and it was full of game. And so the Indians decided that that was going to be the place they were going to meet. And so for centuries, the Indians, every other year, would come to this giant rock, open desert, and camp. They had water, and food, and game, and they would try to work out their problems and communicate with the sky people. They call them the sky people. Apparently, they've been landing there talking to people and Indians for a long, long time.
What, excuse me,
Yes,
But-
and I lived in that area for
Where
a
do-
while.
what do you call the high desert? I mean, I've
The
driven all
Mojave,
over
the Mojave, the Mojave.
Mojave.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I've driven all over.
J-A-A-V-I.
I know how I've driven over.
Beautiful,
many
it's
times.
just beautiful. So, the years come and go. George finishes the machine about 98%, and they told him that it would be unsafe for him to finish the machine. Unsafe, because the government would just probably have it. So the machine never actually got finished, but it worked. And what few people realize is that it has nothing to do with just the structure, but everything to do what is below the concrete floor of that structure. That's what the mechanisms are that pull the energy up from the center and project it into the stream. George mysteriously died and theoretically disappeared in late 1979. I think it was in November or December. Very hard to get the facts from his second wife, Doris, who I eventually got to know as I moved out there and lived on the property. A little turtleback trailer, a little 14-foot, cute little turtle trailer. I lived out in the desert for like a year and a half, and I started writing my books, and I had to get my head clear. I had to get my head clear on some issues that had happened in my life before nothing bad, unfortunately, because I lost a lot of money, but because people were thieves. Anyway. And while there, I had a chance to test all the things that George had told me before he died, because I had made several trips to see him before he died. He disappeared because I became a devotee and I became his student. Anyway, I was taken to Goat Mountain in a dream one night. It was in the middle of the winter, and I woke up in the little turtle trailer, and the wind was howling, my little heater was going, my little kitty cat was all under my arm, and in this dream, I was to go up Goat Mountain, and I was to go to its northeast face, and I was to turn to the east, and I was to bring a smoked piece of glass, a small smoked piece of glass, and I would see the center of the giant rock vortex in the dream, and they showed me right where to go. I had to wait 4.5 months until the weather allowed me, because the climb was treacherous and it's forbidden anyway, because it's BLM land, it's posted, it's got barbed wire, they don't want you anywhere near there, because they know about it. I got up there, and by gosh, it was amazing. You could see it. It was like a phosphorescent neon, and it just was a line that went straight up, straight up.
Pure energy.
Pure energy. It was where everything aligned just perfectly at that point. So I found other things up there too. There's a couple of old gold mines that have been worked up there, and I don't mess with mines. Not a good idea. Snakes and all kinds of, you don't want to mess with a mine. Trust me.
Underground.
No. It's just collapse, earthquake comes, and you're dead. Anyway, I had many experiences there. And it gave me the foundation to start writing books, one of which, actually two of which Jim just gave Jim to look at. And how does that equate to today and tonight, to what we're doing and why we're doing it, and what are we going to do about it? And that is, we have to start understanding our reality. Even the date of 2012 is technically wrong. The whole calendar system is wrong. The whole time theory thing is wrong. Even the celestial mechanics that have been governing it have changed because of what's happening with the solar system, our solar system in relation to the center of the Milky Way galaxy, and the transitions, and the mind thing, and the 2012 thing. And I'm really glad that we didn't have, the planet didn't.
Yeah, but the Mayan woman that I saw on TV
But
said
that's not what they were
we would
referring
have a
to.
horrendous 2012. She predicted that.
Well, there were some bad things, no question. No
Mhm.
question. The whole point of the book was to let you know that there's more out there than you know about. And to get you prepared, because I don't think that the effects of this have yet truly been felt. We're not out of it at all. I'm worried about 2013, 14, even into 15. Mostly because of a series of earthquakes that I'm afraid have not yet happened. I've been tracking earthquakes now for 8 years. I got files that thick about earthquakes. They're 450-some% over their normal range of size and depth and magnitude and frequency. Way out of the chart. I just got 2 notices in tonight as I was leaving. I ascribe to the USGS automated email system where you tell them the range of where you want to look for earthquakes and the magnitude, and they send it to you, and I get stuff comes in every day. I think the Ring of Fire, I said this before, I think the Ring of Fire is getting ready to pop. And if it does, that could signal a very bad period of earthquakes, because where there's volcanoes, there's usually earthquakes, and they work hand in hand.
I just had the quake in Indonesia recently and a tsunami, and it's a working west.
Yes.
Well, they talk about the New Madrid.
Indonesia is very active right
Yeah.
now.
They
Yeah.
talk about New Madrid as if it's humongous, very big
Yes,
comparison
yes.
to the San Andreas or the rest of them, and that what created Real Foot Lake, and this is a big thing here.
It's not a big fault, but it's a dangerous fault. The difference is it's very
Yeah,
dangerous.
dangerous.
It's not that it's 700 miles long and it'll take out, you know, it's a slip slide fault, which means that the movements would be more severe, as they were back in 1811, 1812. There were 3 days of earthquakes. There were at least 4 that were 7 and above.
In this area.
And it reversed the course of the river for several days,
Mhm.
creating islands and lakes, and completely changed and that's one of the reasons they think that it snakes so much, was in our area, is because it tore through the land and created.
Well, of course, I've been in 3 or 4 quakes in 1970. San Fernando Valley was a big one.
Mm-hmm.
You were there.
Mm-hmm.
You
Keep
were-
going. Were you there in
Yeah.
'74?
Oh, yeah.
I got the one. I was in Studio City at Northridge. They had to dig me out of our building.
Well, see, you were closer to the epicenter than
It was
I
right there.
was. But believe you me, I felt them many times because I was out there.
And there's no mistaking it, is there?
You never.
You hear it
know
before you hear it
immediately,
before you feel it.
and you can't really tell someone else.
You hear it before you feel it.
You know it somehow. Know.
You referenced wormwood, which is a biblical thing, and in Revelation. But I'm just wondering what, from the spirituality point of view, how the Indians, the Native Americans there, that were being visited like that, and the other Van Tassel and so forth, how they reconcile that, or what connection did they see between ETs and spirituality?
Are you talking about the Indians?
Mm-hmm. Indians
Well-
and Van Tassel.
Well, I'm not sure I can exactly speak for the Indians, but I found that the question you're asking applies to every other Indian cultural tribe that I've investigated. They all had contact. They weren't contacting just North American Indians or South American Indians or Mongolians. They were contacting all over the globe and all over the local sector of the galaxy, like missionaries. That's about the best way.
Do they manifest to these people the way they did to you as a child?
They can.
They can, of
Yeah,
course.
of course they have physicality, yes. Just like in Star Trek. Honestly.
Okay.
It was like, okay, now, I saw that stuff before there was Gene Roddenberry, before there was Star Trek. I got teleported from that, standing out in front of that little cave. The ship was probably 50 yards sitting in the field. The shield was around it. You couldn't touch, if you touched the shield, he warned me, he says, he goes, don't ever touch it. He said, they'll die instantly. Because it's huge amounts of electromagnetic currents.
And there's a protective field around it. Isn't there a protective?
That's what it was,
Yeah.
but you don't want to touch it.
You wouldn't be able to penetrate.
Oh, yes, you would.
Would
Oh,
you?
yes.
You just,
Yes, basically. Yeah, basically, as we told me. You
Was
don't
all
want to
that,
touch that.
was all that training from 3.5 to 8, was it all more scientific training or philosophical training
Both.
or?
are
Both.
emotional.
Everything. They were learning from me, my emotions, in other words, in between visits, they'd be able to see what it was I experienced that day. And I got to, and by me giving up, I got Elan's. And by Elan got mine as they got mine. In other words, the information, they were so sophisticated, they were able to take everything that happened when I was you know, the deal when I was a little kid on a Saturday morning, my mom was downstairs with a bucket full of old rags that she was soaking, because she used them on the floor or whatever, and I'd bring a whole handful of little baby garter snakes, and I put them in the pan of water, because I'm loving it. I'm 3.5, 4 years old. Wow! She goes in there, and she comes out of there with this thing, and these snakes, and she shrieks. Over goes the bucket, and all the snakes all over me. And they showed me that and said, how would you like to go back in time? I said, okay. And they said, well, what would you like to see? I said, I don't know. I was a kid in Markham, and that's the one they came up with. And then I asked them why. They said, because you learned the most from that experience at that age. That was never to do that to mother again. Never. Stuff like that. And you never forget these things.
Yeah, but a child is totally unconscious of the effects of what they do, but you were more conscious of what you experienced when you weren't around, and cognizant of what she'd experienced.
Was there any theology being related to you?
To me at the time?
In that school, that big school on the
Well,
ship?
here's the thing. Oh, boy, what a great question. Okay, it's 1/4 after. Let's keep rolling. That's okay. I am a product of a very traumatic Catholic boyhood scenario. I went to an Irish Catholic school. In the 5th and 6th grade, I was unfortunate enough to get the same nun, just a Gestapo person. She hated me. Because at 5 I was reading encyclopedias and dictionaries at age 5. I always had the answers. My mom and dad had homeschooled me from 4 to 5. I was reading newspapers. Nothing she told me made any sense, because she always told it to me from the Catholic viewpoint. God had to do this, and if it didn't, and if you don't believe it, you will go to hell and you will burn forever. You must understand that these truths are forever. And it went on and on and on until I said, just stop. And that was my attitude. And it kept me in trouble in 5th and 6th grade, to where she physically beat me up.
Is that the teacher or your mother? The teacher, right?
The nun.
The nun.
Not my mother.
No.
She'd take the pointer, you know the big old pointers? She'd take the thin part in her hand, the big fat part here, and she'd hit me on the back of the legs, and hit me across the chest, and she'd try to smash my hands because I wouldn't play her game at the chalkboard. Because I became the ridicule of the class, because I'm the only one who usually had the right answers. And so she dragged me up there. She grabbed me by my ear as a kid, humiliate me, and drag me all the way to the board and say, write it! I want you to write it! You know what the answer is. You write it. They gotta learn. She was using me to fulfill a role that she couldn't reach the kids. And I knew it at that age. I turned out very badly.
What age was that?
Same year.
11?
Same year.
11.
Same year. That happened in April. My experience was in September. It was very, very traumatic. Anyway, one April morning, it was about 11:15. Big thing on the chalkboard, math, nobody had it. She pulled me up again, and I had the piece of chalk. I started to write the piece of chalk, and I just took it, and I just broke the chalk, and threw it on the ground, and I started to walk away. And she turns around and she defies me. She says, get back! Went back to the blackboard. She said, now, finish! And I wouldn't do it. I just looked at her and I smiled, and I just wouldn't do it. So she gets the pointer, and she's going to rear back. Just like it was a baseball, she was going to hit me with it. She would have killed me. I saw it coming, and I stepped back, and I grabbed it, spun her around. I don't know how I did everything. First I broke the pointer on my little knee and threw it down, and then I caught her with a right punch. I hit her so hard, blasted her back against the blackboard, broke her nose, her glasses,
Oh my goodness.
bleeding. And I remember she's screeching on the blackboard going down, and it was like, oh God, it was like, you know, out of one of these wild teenage movies.
I guess you were excommunicated for that, weren't you?
What's that? No.
Just about.
Well, this poor
No.
little kid thought for sure that I had killed her, and more out of panic and anger, I just went back to my little desk, gathered my stuff, got my coat, and I went out the door. Just before I went out, I turned back and she's still laying there. And I said, I'm really sorry. I did. And then I slammed the door, almost broke it, you know, the glass. Started down the stairs along the hallway, and all of a sudden I heard about a dozen feet. The big bullies of the class. They're going to get me. They're going to kill me because I killed Sister Mary Rosetta. They're coming. I could hear them, and I hear more and more feet. I'm thinking, well, okay, what am I going to do? I mean, they've been bullying me for 2 years, and I was big. Fortunately, I was big. I went out to the front of the school, took off my jacket, my books and stuff. Just as I take my jacket off, it starts to rain, and I said, rain too? You know. And by the time there was 8 or 9. I don't think there was more than that. They opened the door, and it's just like one of these movies that you'd see, these old time movies. They all come out and bump into each other, and half of them are falling. And I'm standing there soaking wet, and I'm already amused because it was like one of these little kid movies you used to see, you know, the old black and white ones. So what do? They all come at me, and they take the littlest, tiniest little kid, who probably, I could have picked him up and thrown him, which I actually did. They put him out in front, and they shove him at me. Now how's that, boys? Big guys. This poor kid, shoving around, he fell right at my feet. I just picked him up. I said, now, you go back into school, and you do it now. And he ran on the side. He ran back up into school because he was too young for this. Well, they came at me anyway. 5-10 minutes later, I was a mess, clothing, black eye, cut lip, my nose, I think, was a little bit out of shape. There wasn't a one of them technically standing. I did it.
You took a few hits, but you did the job.
I did the job. And I know I had help. I know Elon was there helping me. I don't know how I know, but he was there. Anyway, there's a little more to the story, and I don't know if you want to keep going, but it's really interesting. It has the religious aspect that you're talking about. For me, there's been several times when my religion has been severely tested. And this was one of them, okay? The fight's over. They all run back into the class, to the school, pick up. I'm soaking wet. I'm drenched. My coat's wet, my books are wet. I just put my books under my coat and walked off. You come out to the school and you go to the left and you go past the nuns' rectory, and then right after that there's this beautiful sunken stone grotto with a huge altar and the Blessed Virgin Mary statue, and she's there praying, and there's at least 3 or 4 rosaries that people have left on her hand, you know, the grotto. I started walking past it, and it had always been a special place for me. Ever since I can remember, in my worst times at that school, and there were many, I hated it. I would go there and I would seek comfort. So I'm walking by, and I said, wait a minute, this is a time you really should be down there. So I got to the middle, and I turned, and it's raining. I look in, and everything is wet. Here's where it really gets weird. It's about 6 feet of cobblestone, and then you go down the first step. The moment I went down the first step, everything changed. Everything changed. The sun was shining, there was no rain, I was perfectly dry. I could look back at me, and it was raining like HELL, there, and there, except right here. And I thought to myself, okay. So I went and I knelt down and I said my prayer and I made my confession. I said, you know, dear Blessed Mary, I'm so sorry. I may have killed Sister Mary Rosetta, but it was either me or her. And I always negotiated my prayers. And the very calming thing came over me. It's like, peace, go your way. I understand. And I never went back to that school, except when my mother brought my father and me and my brother and a little sister to confront the nun, who still had bandages on her nose 3, 4, 5, 6 days later. And she denied it. She said she tripped and fell. That's how chalkboard. She split the chalkboard for about 2 feet. Just all the way down. God, I don't know how much that cost to fix. And she wouldn't look at me. And I didn't care. I didn't care. I still was too full of, I guess, childhood hatred. And I apologized. They made me apologize, which I thought was right. She didn't. And then the Mother Superior says, well, you're dismissed now. And my mother says, no, you're not dismissed. And my mother dressed her down. So I've been paying for my child's education. Blah, blah. Long history with the church.
Hate to tell you that, but I had a similar childhood, and I was brought up in Catholic school. And
I did get a good education.
I got the best.
The best, but
The best.
it has consequences. Yes?
I was like you, but I escaped another way.
I never went back there. That all
I
happened.
went all through my life and taught in 3 years, taught in Catholic school.
Okay.
Except for 2 or 3.
Most of them were good. No,
Except for 2
most,
or 3.
most of my nuns were excellent. I had just 2 or 3 during that.
But they're so
6 years that-
educated, it's incredible.
Yes, yes. So the spiritual aspect of all this was, yes, my faith had been tested because at that point, I had pulled away from the church and I remained away for years. That church I never went back to, but I did wind up going to another Holy Rosary church in Slovak, because I'm half Slovak, and it was much easier. But anyway, today, that faith is still being tested. It was being tested when I wrote this book, and it was my faith that allowed me to accept what the book of Revelation said. Because if you understand who dictated the book of Revelation, you might find it easier to believe or understand. It was Jesus Christ himself dictated this to his angels, and his angels passed it on to John the Divine on the island of Patmos, where he eventually died. You see? So I have to understand, if Jesus himself said he wrote these words, and it was like, and you better believe it, you know, I think I needed to take it seriously. And when I did, all of the pieces just went like the last time I think this thing came back was 1447 BCE, which is just about the time that Moses was leading the Israelites out of Egypt after 400 years in bondage under Pharaoh. Now, in the movie, I'm sure you remember that, it all happened in an hour and 60 minutes, or 2 or 3 hour movie. In real life, it was probably 4 to 5 to 6 years. You don't move 3.5 million people and all the goods and the cattle and the goats and all the sick people. You don't do that in an hour and a half.
Sinai.
So all the things that have been taking place now, leading up to 2012, are the same size. Uncontrollable floods and storms and hurricanes and earthquakes and all this other stuff. Now, this period is very special for us because we happen to be alive to witness it. It's the convergence of a whole bunch of different celestial things that have little or no, every bit of power and influence against humans, but there's nothing that human power or influence can do to stop these cosmic things from happening. They're on the cosmic clock, the celestial clock, not the earth clock. Not the clock based on earth movements and seasons and all of this other stuff. All of that is not necessarily accurate either. There's a very thin, credible basis for what is the truth anymore in this world. Just look at our political system. You know, forget all our political problems and our financial problems and going off the cliff. What if Mother Nature suddenly goes, okay, bam, 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 we lose 1 or 2 cities in earthquakes, we're finished. We're finished. We can't rebuild in New Orleans. We haven't rebuilt the Northeast. We haven't rebuilt Katrina. We just leave them. They just rot. Now the Northeast. If we get through 13 and 14 without any more trauma, tragedy, death, misfortune, disaster, I'll be one of the happiest. If we don't, gotta realize that these things can strike us anywhere, anytime, without warning. And that's been proven now. There is a metropolitan area within the United States that has sometime or another in the last 12 years, here's the hard fact. In the last 12 years, almost every county or major province or state in the United States, including Alaska and Hawaii, have been subject to tremendous earth changes that have been escalating ferociously. And we just can't talk about it. It would scare everybody. It would.
Do you think there are people in certain spheres like that are cognizant of this kind of thing? That would, well, they wouldn't
Nothing
present
they can
it
do.
to our
Nothing.
government.
Nothing that they can do. See, I'm not a big conspiracy guy.
Well, no.
There's enough murder, mischief, and mayhem. I don't have to create another conspiracy. You know what I mean? Yeah, of course they know. There's nothing they
There are
can do
people
about
who
it.
know.
Of course they do. They have a lot of subliminal government programs, you know. Disaster.gov, you know. The Weather Channel. Why do you think this Weather Channel runs all these disaster things? Is to keep everybody's toes up and watching. Good. It's good that people understand this, but they're still not getting the message. Now, when the Northeast gets hit, that's an act of God, I guess. Can't blame those people. Nobody was ready for that.
Do you think
Can't
we're
blame the
next?
government.
Do you think we're next, or the West Coast is next? But the New Madrid or the San Andreas?
I'd worry about the San Andreas before the Madrid.
Before you worry about New
And
Madrid?
if we get it, we get it. Memphis is in big trouble. Memphis itself.
Memphis is in trouble, period.
And mostly, well, I know, but mostly the downtown is in trouble. If a moderate earthquake's hit, there'll be a lot of damage to Memphis, but mostly downtown is going to fall apart. It's all brick and mortar. Many of these old buildings,
There's some old
they're
ones.
trying to fortify them. Now, the new ones will be all right, probably, the old ones. But I would worry more about the West Coast. San Francisco, they just had another weird one. Somebody's being set up on the West Coast. It's either going to be Seattle or Portland or San Francisco or LA or San Diego. Somebody's going to get it. And it'll be the whiplash part of it. In other words, it may start up here, and wherever it ends, the whiplash is
Now,
usually
the
down
plates-
south.
The plates off California,
Or slip slide.
yeah, and then you think that they're influencing the plates here?
Of course.
I thought the United States would be all on one plate.
No, it's 3 or 4 different places.
Therefore,
You gotta
Within the
understand. All right,
entire-
look, see this table? This is the Mississippi River,
okay,
all right?
all right.
It starts way up in Minnesota, by the time it gets down to New Orleans. Now, it's almost in the middle of the country. And that's because it appears that probably 2, 3, 4 million years ago, the continental plate fractured and opened, and it created what's known as the Mississippi Valley. The west fell down, the east fell down, and it created this huge valley. And where does the water go? Down the middle of the valley. And that's, when the Ice Age, there was an Ice Age 75, 100,000 years ago that ended, all that water came roaring down the Mississippi River. Now, it's itself a huge fracture zone. That's how it got there in the first place. So it's not just the New Madrid fault. If a major impact hits the Midwest, and it goes from the top to the bottom, we're all going. I don't see that. I don't see that. It's not bold enough to do that. The other plates are much more seductive, much more fragile. Okay. Now that's just me, and I hope I'm right.
How
I hope I'm right.
How do you think that extraterrestrials can influence the environmental and physical Earth?
In any way and every way they can. They've been doing it
That's
for
right.
centuries. I believe that that's one of the reasons why the Mississippi, they call the fracture zone, has held up all these years. In fact, talk about strange. The whole reason, the ship that I was on was a large scout ship, large. 95 to 125 feet in circumference, 75 feet high compartments. It was a tiny little thing compared to what they call them. It's like Gene Roddenberry, the mothership. They would send these out all over. You could go here, there. And it was here to relieve the stress fractures on the Mississippi River. Did anybody see Cocoon? Okay. Remember when it opens up? Below the water, you see this blue beam, and it's going along the bottom. It's looking for its cocoons. Remember? Do you remember that? No. All right. Well, that's what they do when they would throw down this electromagnetic beam process, and it would either melt or repair or whatever it did. They were going to do it all the way down the river, all the way down south. But coming in over Siberia, see. They just don't come in like this. They have to. Everything corkscrews into the Earth's atmosphere. And it's clockwise, not counterclockwise. See, the reason it goes clockwise is that that's counter to where we're coming. Okay. So it had been struck by some kind of ray beam. Actually, it turned out to be lasers. Russia had lasers as early as 1946. Stalin had already been working on it, okay, long before, and they also were working on flying saucers. Another story. It was struck by this Russian laser beam, and it damaged an internal piece of machinery that allowed them to navigate in the Earth's gaseous envelope, because it's different than space. In space, there is no gas. There's nothing. It's not really empty, but there's nothing there. So they had to land a craft, create the field, land the craft, put a probe into the ground, re-energize and electromagnetically correct this piece of equipment that got damaged. And there's other things too technical for me to remember. I was 11 years old, but I remember seeing it was like the thing drilled, like, and then it was like took them like an hour or two. That's why they had to stay there. Okay. And by the way, I think that where they landed was that's where they got the energy.
Yes.
They knew right where to land. So they created it. The religious implications are that they believe they don't call the supreme being God. They call it the universal consciousness. And they believe that it's all super powerful and that it evolves everything that's ever been created. That's pretty close. That covers a lot. Anything that's ever been created. Okay. They don't practice religion as we know it. They're more advanced. They have a different moral, physical, spiritual code. It's extremely high vibration. These are beings that are, I'm not saying they're flawless. I'm not saying they don't have flaws. Yeah, I'm not saying they're flawless, but they're pretty much perfectly mature, conscious. They're humanoid type beings. Okay? That's it?
Fascinating.
Well, thank you.
You have fascinated everybody for an hour.
Oh, right.
I want to thank Dr. Jaysen Rand for being with us today, and thank all of you and you viewers for being with us on Core Concepts. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.